So good afternoon to all of you, and again, thank you for being there present. So we will make some brief kirtan before sharing some words about vulnerability and empowerment. So I would like to share one kirtan that I think many of you may know, which is somehow rather connected to the topic. And I will share the link in the chat section for the ones who do not know and would like to have the lyrics, you will, to follow, even though I will chant only myself without answer, because the dynamics of being connected here is maybe too difficult for call and response in kirtan, but at least you can chant with me at the same time. This kirtan is called Gurudev, and it's a composition by Thakur Bhaktivinoda, about specifically connected to many of the points of this third verse of Sikshastakam, in the context of begging and praying to the spiritual master for the necessary grace to properly develop these different attributes. So I consider it's an important, interesting way of introducing the lecture through the grace of Thakur Bhaktivinoda and including in him all our parampara. So did you receive the link there?
Yes. What is the first line of the song?
Sorry?
The first line of the song? I'm looking at a book.
Yeah, Gurudev. I mean, the first word is Gurudev, but that's like a call in the beginning. If not, it's Kripa Bindu Diya.
Okay, Kripa Bindu. Okay, because there's several Gurudevs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, very good.
And that's the name of the, yeah, I think you will find it with that name, with the first part, Gurudev Kripa Bindu Diya.
Yep, got it.
Okay. Shri Thakur Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Shri Sikshastakam ki jai, Shriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Hari Nam Sankirtan ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanand Hari Bol. Gurudev Kripa Bindu Diya Karune Idase Trinape Kayatina Shakala Sahane Baladiya Koro Nijamane Spriya Hina Shakale Shamana Purite Shakati Dehonata Jata Jata Sabito Gaibo Harinama Shuke Aparada Habihata Kabeheno Kripa Labhiyai Jana Kritartha Hoi Venata Shakti Bodhina Amiyati Dina Koromare Atma Shata Yogyata Vichare Kichu nahi pai tumara karuna shara Karuna na hoile kandiya kandiya pranana rakhibo hara Karuna na hoile kandiya kandiya pranana rakhibo Gurudev Kripa Bindu Diya Koro ei dashe Tina Pekayati Jaya Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Guru Deva Guru Deva Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva Guru Deva Jaya Guru Deva. So the translation of the song I'll share with you, it says, the first verse, Gurudev, O spiritual master, give to this servant just one drop of mercy. I'm lower than a blade of grass. Give me all health. Give me strength. Let me be as you are, without desires or aspirations. I offer you all respects, for thus I may have the energy to know you correctly. Then, by chanting the holy name in great ecstasy, all my offenses will cease. When will such mercy fall to this one who is weak and devoid of intelligence? Allow me to be with you. If you examine me, you will find no qualities. Your mercy is all that I am made of. If you are not merciful unto me, I can only weep, and I will not be able to maintain my life. Sri Thakur Bhakti Vinod ki jai. Umagyanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namashrishtam Manumapi Satchibhutram Matraswarupam Rupam Tasya Grajam Rupurim Mathurim Gosavatim Radha Kundan Girivaram Maho Radhika Madhavasham Prapto Yasya Pratita Gripaya Shri Gurum Tannatashmi Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Vacham Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Narpitacharim Chirat Karunaya Vatirna Kalum Shamarpaitam Unataj Balarasam Svabhakti Shriyam Haripurata Sundara Dhyuti Kadamba Sandipitaha Shada Hriday Kandaresh Purato Vasachinandana Janulambita Vujo Kanakabadatu Shankirtanai Kapitaro Kamalaya Taksham Vishwambaro Duyabaro Jugadharma Palu Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavataram Ladini Shakti Swarupaya Gauranga Suridata Bhakta Shakti Pradhanaya Gadadhara Namastute Gadadhara Namastubhyam Jasya Gauranga Jivanam Gadadhara Namastubhyam Jasya Gauranga Jivanam He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namastute Radhe Brindavanadishe Karunam Bridavahini Kripaya Nijapadabja Dasyanmayam Pradiyatam Bhaktya Vihinaya Aparadha Lakshaya Shiptascha Kamaditarangamati Kripamaitvam Sharanam Prapanam Brinde Namaste Charanarabindam Brinde Namaste Charanarabindam. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Shri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Shri Shri Gaur Radha Madhav ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanam Hari Bol. So, good afternoon to all of you again, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share my vulnerability and hopefully my empowerment with all of you. So this will be the topic for today's talk, vulnerability and empowerment. Yes, last year I made one talk, I remember also, specifically at Archana Siddhi's place, Radha Gopinath Mandir, called Empowerment and Vulnerability. So now some little news are there, vulnerability and empowerment. It will be from different perspective, although some elements will be presented there. That time I spoke mainly about an explanation from the Atma Rama verse of the Bhagavad in connection to Sriman Mahaprabhu as the most volcanic and vulnerable and volcanic face of the Absolute. So we will touch that for a minute here, but mainly we will concentrate today about how this idea of vulnerability and empowerment expresses itself in the context of the third verse of Sikshastakam. So nowadays we are in very conducive times to speak about this topic. In these last months, our whole humanity has to be like facing, seeing face to face, and with their own vulnerability, as well as the others, in different forms, in different levels that we may have never thought about. Being too close means you will start to become aware of many things that sometimes we didn't want to realize. We will prefer looking in another direction. So the present situation is taking us to the following question to ourselves. Now, what to do with this element of vulnerability seems to capture every pore, every atom of my being, without almost giving me a break, without allowing me to forget that element, not even for a moment. So we are in very special and auspicious, I would say, dynamics in those sense. Even though we may like to think negatively in terms of coronavirus and so on, we have coined this idea of coronavirus, and vulnerability has to do a lot with that. We are in times when we are able to realize our vulnerability in a way and in a level that we have never been able to do so as humanity, as a collective, and as individuals. So vulnerability is a very, challenging project, because it has to do with the journey, and it's an unpredictable journey. Vulnerability has to do with embarking on a journey that we don't know where it will end, what will happen on the way. But actually, this is the movement. This is how life moves, how love moves, actually. Srila Rupa Goswami will say, Ayeri Bhaga Timpremna Shrabhava Kutilava. So this means love moves like a snake in a crooked way. That's the point. You cannot predict love's next step. You cannot control that movement. That's how lives work. That's how life in its ultimate expression work, love. Unpredictable journey. So vulnerability has to do with recognize our lack of control in front of this unpredictable journey. What to speak what you officially accept to embark upon the journey of spirituality. That's pretty unpredictable. So vulnerability will be there, like it or not. So vulnerability has to do with this, with an unpredictable journey, and how we will be instructed by the circumstances in that journey. By the circumstances, even by Sri Guru himself. Today I was reading a nice quote that one devotee mentioned, that sometimes Guru is there to teach us about how to love, and love moves in a crooked way. So the Guru will teach us in a crooked way sometimes also. He will teach us, or she will teach us directly about what to do in a clear way, and sometimes indirectly in a way that may, again, shock us or make us rethink what's happening here. But it's part of the teaching about the land of love, which will have that movement, unpredictable movement. So as disciples, we shouldn't be too sure about what Guru will do, or how he should be, she should be, how predictable her teaching should be. Doesn't mean to approach Guru, to approach spirituality. So unpredictable, that's a very important word that we shouldn't try to erase from our dictionary. And vulnerability, beyond what we may think about this term, now, well, of course, we will elaborate on that. It doesn't have to do with losing or even with winning. Sometimes our head works in that way, black or white, good and bad, win, loss. Actually, vulnerability is not winning. Vulnerability is not losing in the following sense. Actually, vulnerability means, let's say, to have the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome of what will happen. That's really courageous, to appear, to recognize, and to be seen in that particular moment when things are getting out of our control. And that's not weakness. That's the point. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. That's a very important point. If you are courageous, you cannot speak about being weak. But courageous has to do with this point. To have that availability, that's disposition, to present ourselves in the midst of something that is totally out of our control. I always quote these nice words from a Buddhist group that says, relax, everything is out of control. Because sometimes we think, relax, I will relax only when everything is in my control. That will never happen. So start relaxing now. So even though we may say these nice things about vulnerability, and now we'll connect that, of course, with the idea of empowerment, generally, many times we do not, we may say that officially, but in our subconscious, the word vulnerable won't be seen, appreciated as something positive for some. And even less, that will be connected to the idea of empowerment. So similarly, it will happen with this third verse of Sikshastakam, that for some of us, it may sound like nice poetry, but when you try to apply it, oh, it's considerable bitter. To be lower than the grass, to show extreme tolerance, as our Guru Maharaj will say, to let your head be stepped on in the higher world, so you can have a head there instead of stepping on others' head here. So all this may be seen as undesirable for our, I will say, coward side. And why do not like this? Why do not like just the word vulnerability and all its possible implications? Because in our confusion, generally we connect vulnerability with excruciating shame, fear, and even disconnection. And the purpose of our life is exactly the opposite. The purpose of our life is to be connected, to feel connected. That's yoga, actually. When we say yoga, actually yoga implies the capacity of feeling connected. Of course, there are levels of connection and levels of feeling regarding which type of plug you're looking with, type of yoga. We'll speak about that. Here we are speaking about bhakti. So bhakti and this particular verse actually are pointing in this direction. A particular type of yoga, particular way of connecting with reality, even with the environment and so on. Mahaprabhu will speak about this here in the context of vulnerability. So I think that even beyond the immediate irrational fear that we may have towards this idea, if we for one moment try to become rational and objective, we will hopefully accept that actually the moment we start to be strong is that moment when we are able to recognize our weakness, our vulnerability, when we start to recognize that thing that could be improved, upgraded. That's the door, the portal towards empowerment. So vulnerability is a portal towards empowerment. And this has a lot to do with humility, again, as Arjun Siddhi was mentioning. Humility doesn't mean to think of you less, but actually to think less of you in the sense of understanding who you are, but who are the rest and who is the divine and everything. And from that context, understand who are you and what's your potential and so on. So in this verse, we will hear about this type of humility. Like to recognize in a sincere way, to recognize in a realistic way our present necessity, dependent condition, vulnerability. So only when there is acceptance of who we are, we can start living our lives, basically. We can become empowered. We can become strong. When we recognize our, again, weakness, there we open to the necessity of receiving certain particular strength or empowerment. And also this has to do, for example, with terms that nowadays we may hear, terms like self-esteem, for example. People speak a lot about self-esteem, but on many occasions we really miss the point there, and we may end up basically feeding our false ego, basically. and not changing, not improving. That's the most important thing here. So real self-esteem, of course, that implies recognize our worthiness. But what's our worthiness? That's the point. We are not worthy from an isolated conception. We are beings that are totally interconnected with the environment, with a particular potential. So we cannot separate ourselves from our environment or from our potential. When I say environment, I say potential, because we can exercise our will in relation to an environment, and then the potential will be expressed. So we have worthiness, but it's a worthiness in connection to a particular environment, a particular potential. So the point of real self-esteem implies how worthy we are because of the potential that has been put into us. And that's a point. No? That's a gift, something that has been given, and we have brought that with us. So how worthy we are in that particular context. So real self-esteem will have to do with recognize the ability to accept and recognize our own nature. And again, our own nature is totally connected to the idea of being in a healthy way vulnerable. Because by constitution, this is an important word that you may suspect I'm going to say now, tatashta. So tatashta has to do with vulnerability, basically. Tatashta means I'm a product of my environment, in the words of Tulasidhar Maharaj. I can only analyze myself in terms of adaptability to a particular nature that is around me. So I'm vulnerable to the influence of the environment, which is it's not a bad word. We are vulnerable, which means we are being influenced. Nowadays, there are these guys who like to call themselves influencers, right? They present themselves even as such. That's their, what do you work? What's your job? I'm an influencer. No, okay, but you are also tatashta. You are also influenced. No? So we shouldn't forget that part in the age of influencers. So we have to understand the point when we speak about vulnerability, or this verse of Sikshastakam that we will go a little bit more in detail now. Actually, we are not speaking about you have to be vulnerable. Basically, we are speaking about you have to recognize the vulnerability that is already there with you in your constitution. I mean, and it's not bad. If it's part of your constitution, it means there is something that will be there, is there, and will be there always. So it must be something important. It's part of you. So it's not something, okay, I have to be vulnerable. Till yesterday I was not, but today I will be. No, you are already vulnerable. It's only about acknowledging the fact that you are in a healthy way. Again, now we will analyze the perverted, distorted expressions of that as well. So we should recognize our vulnerability in a healthy way, in a nurturing environment. So in this way, we need to develop a deep sense of worthiness. That's totally right, for us to be balanced and happy, basically. We need to develop a deep sense of worthiness in the context of the gift of our potential. That's important, because I can try to feel myself worthy from the pride, from the ego. That won't work. That's not real self-esteem. So if I develop a deep sense of worthiness in the context of the gift that has been put to me and the potential that it entails, that's real worthiness. That's real self-esteem. And that's real humility and vulnerability, all that in the same place. And one word about potential, because sometimes when we speak about potential, we understand the idea of that thing that we can become, our ideal, our future, what we should be, we may think even in those terms. But first, if you would like to become someone or something, let's say, first we should accept who we are now. And that has to do with vulnerability again. Who we are right now. In both terms, in your spiritual constitution as Tatastha, and maybe in your present personality situation as a conditioned soul with this and this, whatever, fear and doubt. First, you should accept all that. I think some mic is on. First, we should accept all that. And after that, we can attain the best version of ourselves, upgrade our own self to the best possible download of the latest app from our own self. What we should be, or mainly what we will want to be. It's not an imposition. Our Guru Maharaj gives this example of, if you want to reach room 108 in the shopping mall, first you have to go to the map and see where are you staying on. Now, the map will say, this is room 108 and you are here. So you have to accept where you are now, who you are now, what's your constitution, and only on that basis you can really trace a realistic path toward the goal, toward the version you want to become in. So vulnerability has to do with this rooting in my present condition, and from that foundation, build the whole project, if you will. Again, even though Swami Padmanabh is saying very nice things about vulnerability, still some fear maybe in ourselves, even when we hear the words, what to speak, when we have to exercise that in public or in practice. And yes, there is a very deeply rooted fear to show ourselves vulnerable. I think we all know about this in some level or another. We have a deep fear of showing ourselves like that, of realizing that for ourselves, or the fact that others may realize how vulnerable I may be. I remember some years ago, I saw one, it was like an artistic performance, but it was more kind of a psychological experiment for me, which was made by one artist called Marina Abramovic. And what she did was basically sitting herself in a table, and on the other side of the table, she had one person. And many people was invited to do the experiment, if you will. So the experiment consisted in looking at the eyes of the other person as much as they were able to sustain that, maybe for hours, and just looking right into the eyes, both parts, and see the outcome of that. Of course, trying to see each other from this side, vulnerability, try to really penetrate into the other's ultimate being. And it was interesting, the results. Many people started crying terribly. Some others were not able to maintain the situation and just left running after a few minutes. They felt themselves totally invaded. And many things were appearing in the course of that. And so when we are speaking about these things, it's similar to that. There is some fear, and maybe there is some lack of confidence in ourselves, and that's why we fear the environment, the influence of the environment, because we haven't yet fully embraced unconditional love. That happens. So we feel every love here is conditional, so I have to be perfect in order to be loved. So in order to be loved, I have to show myself perfect. If someone realizes my weaknesses, fragility, vulnerability, nobody will love me. I will remain alone. I don't want that. So we fear showing that weak side, but actually that's the source of all beauty and empowerment. And very interestingly, the third verse of Sikshastakam also speaks about Nishtha, which has to do with strong confidence. And at the same time, it's speaking about the great disposition towards one's own vulnerability. So here we find this striking contrast, to become more humbler than a blade of grass, and to have firm faith. So it seems contradictory, but it's totally in harmony. Humility and confidence, and vulnerability and empowerment. So that's what's Nishtha about. So Nishtha is for most of us the next goal to attain. And in order to attain that goal, we have to know how to harmonize these ideas of vulnerability and empowerment. If we misunderstand them, we won't be willing to open ourselves to vulnerability. We won't be able to reach the necessary empowerment. So again, this is the ideal version, how to reach such a goal. But being realistic, sometimes this is not always the standard for everyone. So apart from this also, I know that one of the main problems for many of us regarding being vulnerable, apart from, again, mistaking this idea of I have to be vulnerable instead of recognizing I'm already vulnerable. Apart from that, one problem will be those moments where we expose ourselves, we expose our weakness, our fragility in the wrong environment. Again, there is no wrong environment in one sense. Environment is perfect and nobody's to blame outside, but at the same time, we may not have the capacity to walk that talk. And in our present situation, we may need to expose ourselves, our vulnerability in certain specific terms, to certain specific public. It's okay. But sometimes if we did that in the wrong direction, that may create some fear to do that again. So it's that's the reason why Mahaprabhu here is also suggesting expose your vulnerability to Sri Nam, which is the most generous agency, and its agents as well, no? Sri Guru, Parampara, Vaishnava, Sadhus. Try to present yourself in such a naked way in that particular direction, and you will be received so much empathy and compassion and nurturing. Guru Maharaj may give sometimes example of the interior decorator, how Sri Nam is acting like that. When we expose ourselves to the influence of the holy name, and before starting to make the official ornamentation of the house, starts to empty the whole house and to throw. This is not functioning, this is out of. So the idea is we need to empty ourselves. We may say Harinam will come and empty ourselves, but we have to be willing for that. We have to also have our own volition and invite Nam to come and invite Sri Nam to empty ourselves in order to be filled, fulfilled, empowered. So there's a part for us also. Free will has to do some part in the whole equation. So we need to empty ourselves in order to be filled. No? Maybe the idea of emptying ourselves may sound for you like a breakdown, but I call that spiritual awakening. So we need to know how to properly express these situations. Sometimes our mind may perceive something as a total breakdown, but actually it's a total chance of spiritual awakening. So Archan Siddhi gave this classical example of Draupadi, where she's being naked, and she's still sustaining herself on her sari, not fully accepting her vulnerability in that particular situation, if you will, struggling against that reality, and calling Krishna, but only half a call, if you will, not fully vulnerable, not full call, and Krishna is not appearing. Krishna is not empowering her. That's the point. And she still is in a situation with increasing anxiety. So she's not empowering herself, if you will, by emptying herself, by surrendering herself completely. And of course, we know there's happy end to the story. Eventually, she throws that and she presents the Saranagati Atmanivedana Mudra, no? The gesture with the hands up, the two of them, I throw the control, the false sense of control, and I express my total vulnerability and dependence, and full empowerment comes there. So this idea of emptying ourselves is very important. Emptying ourselves, become transparent, show ourselves fully. As Guru Maharaj will say, not have a private life. That's the point of not having private life. It's not just sharing the password of your bank account in Instagram. That's foolishness, not vulnerability, no? And that will be poverty as well. But real vulnerability has to do with emptying yourself from those things that need to be exposed in order to be properly dealt with. Sometimes the nice analogy is also given with the Vamsi, Krishna's flute. Krishna's flute is a piece of bamboo, empty bamboo piece, like hollow you say in English. So we have to become empty, hollow, like a hollow Vamsi, which is the idea here, Krishna's full breath, can pass through his Vamsi without any obstacles because it's totally hollow. So divine will can flow through that. So Mahaprabhu wants, through this third verse, is inviting all of us. He desires that. He desires that his followers become like a Vamsi, so that only Krishna's breath will pass through. Only Krishna's will pass through. So we empty ourselves, Krishna will play the flute through us, will fulfill us. Only then the divine can fully bestow his mercy. And only then we as aspiring followers can accept that mercy. Srila Sridhar Maharaj will say something similar as well. He will say, if you want to access the sadhu's heart, if you want to enter there, first you have to let him, her, access your own heart. Open it, give the password, empty yourself. Not be afraid of showing your fragility, your imperfection. Trust in the principle of unconditional love. Recognize your need for help. Become filled, unfulfilled. Srila Rupa Goswami also presents this principle, very important part of the Padeshamrita, where he's speaking in the 4th verse about Priti Lakshanam. Interestingly, Priti Lakshanam means loving exchanges, loving interaction between devotees. So what that he said there, Dadati pratri grinati guhyama kyati prichati bhunkti bojayate chaiva sadvidam Priti Lakshanam. So, he's speaking about revealing the mind, many things, of course, giving dadati pratigrinati guhyam akyati prichati. That's the main thing here. Revealing your mind and hearing others' mind. Giving your mind, receiving your mind. Opening your heart, basically. Showing yourself as you are. That's a very important situation, moment. And the point is, that's a symptom of affection. That's a symptom of love. And love is empowerment. I mean, when we are loving, when we love, when we feel we can love or are being loved, we feel ourselves full of power. So Rupa Goswami mentions, this is one of the exchanges of power, of love. This is one of the ways the devotees empower each other, themselves, by revealing their minds, opening their hearts. That's real sharing. Sharing in the context of vulnerability. We could say if it doesn't feel vulnerable, the sharing is probably not constructive. That's a very important thermometer for the whole thing. If it doesn't feel vulnerable, most probably the sharing is superficial, not constructive. It's not touching the deepest core of our heart. The importance of vulnerability is everywhere, not only in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. I remember the famous 12 steps. They also start, the very first step has to do with vulnerability. These 12 steps that people take on for transcending certain addictions and so on. It's a very interesting conception because it's theistic and it starts from day one. With first point is recognize that the situation is beyond your control and that there will be a control. If you want to control the situation, you will have to resort to a control that is about yourself. So you need a type of help that is beyond yourself. That's an important point. Vulnerability, again, you open yourself to that recognition. And of course, this is totally applicable in Bhakti through the idea of personal effort and grace. So grace is something that is beyond myself. But I have to do something in order to obtain grace. I have to ask for that. I have to recognize I need that. As we gave the example, if I'm falling in a hole, I cannot go out. I need help. I need grace. I have to do something. I mean, scream for help. And the other person will come, will bring the rope, will make the more strength, and I have just only to take the rope and be saved. I did my part, which is recognize my vulnerability. So as we say, that's real courage. Vulnerability has to do a lot with courage, not with weakness. So try to process the idea in the proper way. This third verse of Sikshastakam, as we will see, speaks about empowerment, not, what's the contrary, depowerment. So real courage, different from bravery, because the word seems similar. Interestingly, the word courage, which is practically synonymous with vulnerability, courage, comes from the Latin word core, which means heart. Sometimes you use in English the expression from the core of my heart. So core, in Spanish, heart is corazón. So it starts with the part core. So courage comes from the word heart, which means to tell your story, or to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart, without hiding anything, and being totally honest with yourself. Having the courage, putting your heart on the table, if you will, having the courage of being imperfect, and thus allowing, in this way, we will allow ourselves and others to be compassionate, because compassion will be able to flow when one is willing to accept that. So by that type of courage, compassion will be invoked, and by that compassion from divine, from others, connection will be invoked. We spoke in the beginning how much fear we have of not being connected, but here we are seeing how vulnerability is real courage, and that will create real compassionate exchanges, real connection, as a result of authenticity, of being authentic with our particular present situation. That will involve all these other phases of empowerment, basically. And only then real life will start, basically. Only then we will feel alive ourselves, and we will allow ourselves to be alive, and we will see everything around us as fully alive. And very interestingly, that's the example of Mahaprabhu given in his third verse. He's seeing the grass speaking to him, the tree instructing him. Everything is alive, everything is a guru, everything is instructing, because he's fully situated in the mood of a disciple, vulnerable, open to grow, open to be nurtured, open to learn. So we see how much connected all these principles of vulnerability and empowerment are with Mahaprabhu's third verse. So let's go for a minute specifically to some of the ingredients of this third verse that I never quoted, sorry. Trinada pisunichena tarora pisaishnuna mani namanadina kirtaniya sadahari. So Mahaprabhu here is speaking about 4 things, actually 5. First, he says, in order, well, he said you should be humbler than a blade of grass, tolerant than a tree, offering respect to others, not expecting honor for yourself. And in this way, you will be able to constantly glorify Hari, to permanently engage in a state of kirtan, if you will. So 4 virtues are there, sunichena, manina, manadena, manina, manadena, sunichena, sahishnana. But the 5th one is there, kirtaniya sadahari as well. So actually not only this verse of Sikshastakam, but actually every single verse from Sikshastakam is showing us a level of humility, a level of vulnerability, a level of emptying ourselves, and thus a level of empowerment. We have analyzed that in our Sikshastakam series. I won't go there into detail. But for example, few examples, verse 2, Mahaprabhu is showing certain humility. Durdaiva midrisha mihajadina anuragas, Dulal Chandra Prabhu say today. I feel repentance because of not having a taste for Srinam. Eventually Mahaprabhu will say, I'm falling in this ocean of birth and death, type of emptiness. Next verse he will pray, when will I experience certain static symptoms such as tears? And the next verse, without Govinda, the whole world is empty and I'm feeling like this. And so we see, if you pay close attention, there are different expressions of vulnerability, of humility, of emptying oneself, even highly in the next stage to be receiving a higher level of fulfillment. That's what we call progress in the spiritual life. You have to take a higher level of emptying yourself to attain a higher level of feeling yourself, and so on. So every single stage from our spiritual life, from Shraddha to Prem, will be characterized with these 2 points of a certain type of humility, vulnerability, a certain type of grace, empowerment. To Shraddha, related to Sadhu Sangha, and so on. Till Prem, and so it continues ongoing with. So the very first, I would say the first 3 lines of this verse speak mainly about vulnerability, Sunichena, Saishuna, Manina, Manadena. And the last line, if you will speak about empowerment. Kirtaniya Sadahari. First, Mahaprabhu is saying, try to recognize yourself as lower than the blade of grass. Of course, it's not an imposition, this idea. You should really reach that conclusion in a natural way. And it's a way of doing that. You should be more tolerant than the tree. Appreciate that in the tree and realize how you may be lacking that, and thus inspired to that. Show respect to others. No expectation of respect towards you. Vulnerability, 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 and vulnerability. These four pillars. These are four regulative principles for us, the real ones. And the result of that, in the proper context, under the shelter of Srinam, Kirtaniya Sada Hari, you will be constantly engaged in glorifying Hari, empowerment. You will attain Nishta. You will be steady in your bhajan. So this verse actually is speaking to us about real vulnerability, not so-called vulnerability that make weaken ourselves. So every expression of real vulnerability necessarily has to take us to a certain type of empowerment, to a certain type of love, to a certain type of positive attainment, I will say. So there's a deep connection between vulnerability and love. Love is our goal. Even without spiritual life, everyone's looking for love. They're all with their own idea of that, but the point is we cannot live without conceiving such a thing. But vulnerability is really tied to that. Freud once said, of course from his particular perspective, but that's applicable to what we are speaking today. Freud said, we are never so vulnerable as when we love. And he said that, of course, not from the context of prem bhakti and pure divine love. So when we really love, which means in the context of spirituality, we will be really vulnerable. So if we are never so vulnerable as when we love, that applies ultimately to divine love. So loving implies being vulnerable, like having a risk, especially in this world, of course. In this world, you love someone, or you so-called love someone from a selfish way, and it's a risk. And generally the risk becomes true. The person broke your heart, you broke their heart, whatever happens, some failure is there because there's no real love yet. But even in the real love, if you are not fully on the other side, you may feel some apparent risk. Srila Sridhar Maharaj will say that. In the beginning, you will feel too much risk, no gain. Eventually, you will feel as the more the risk, the more the gain. And eventually, you realize no risk at all gain. But we will have to go through these stages step by step. But we see vulnerability is really connected with love. We will see that at the end of our exposition here by speaking even about the gopis, the spiritual world expressing that even on Prem Bhakti. So if love is connected with vulnerability, I mean, given that connection, it's interestingly also that Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami, when he presents this third verse of Sikshastakam in his Chaitanya Charitamrita, he mentions, by chanting Harinam, following this attitude, you will attain love, Prem. So again, that's a very interesting connection between vulnerability and love. He's saying, if you embrace this third verse in your kirtan, if you embrace this vulnerability, that's the only way you will attain Prem Bhakti through chanting. That's the only way you attain such an empowerment, divine love. So again, we receive this confirmation between the connection between vulnerability and empowerment. So this is real vulnerability, the empowering one. So we already spoke a little bit about what's that directly. So, but to make the whole presentation complete, let's speak a little bit about what's not real vulnerability. Let's speak indirectly about vulnerability. And we need both sides of the coin to fully understand something. Always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna, and so on. So what's false vulnerability? I will, in brief words, also Arjun Siddhi mentioned that briefly. False vulnerability will have to do with what we may call victim consciousness, which is the exact opposite to Krishna consciousness. And we are in a particular time, not precisely regarding coronavirus and those things, but we are in Kali Yuga, basically. Kali Yuga means the age of quarrel, of course, hypocrisy. But if you play out the implications of those terms, well, you will say, okay, we are in the age of victimization. Because we are suffering, we are experiencing the different obstacles that are typical of this age, but all of us choose how to react to those, and many will choose to victimize themselves. But as the saying goes, all of us suffer, that's a fact, but to be a victim, it's a personal choice. That's a different thing. It doesn't have to do with what you are going through externally, but how you choose to stand to the situation. So all of us are suffering. That's a fact. We are not here together to say, I'm suffering. Everyone will say, I'm also suffering. But a different thing is to be a victim. So what's victim? What's victimization, victim consciousness? Well, the classical definition of victim consciousness has to do with a certain state of consciousness where the person is denying all personal responsibility for those things that are happening in his or her life. That's basically victim consciousness. The total escape from commitment and responsibility with existence itself. So it's a particular state of consciousness. It doesn't have to do with what's happening in your life, but how you are processing that. So in this case, it's not Krishna consciousness. It's a type of consciousness where you are denying all possible personal responsibility for whatever's going on in your life. So very easily, someone else is to blame in that direction. But that's why we are putting sometimes the Acharya say, the index finger outside of our japa mala, our malika, because that finger has to do with pointing to others and blaming others, victim consciousness, which is exact opposite of vulnerability, which is exact ideal attitude towards how to chant Harinam. So you have to chant Harinam following the third verse, and victim consciousness is just sabotage to that. So that finger goes out. Symbolizing, it's not just putting the finger out, of course. It's putting out that victim consciousness. And again, we are in particular times where this is sometimes turns out to be difficult. Nowadays, we are today there's something called intersectionality also. This is like a very radical interpretation of the things that are going on around us. It has to do with this victim consciousness, where the more labels of oppression and victimhood one has accrued, the more one's view of reality is deemed to have authority, and the more one is considered to have moral worth. This is a whole new stance nowadays. The more victim you are, the more rights you have, or something like this. The better person you are, or the worst person is the other one, something like this. And because the other is worse and worse and worse, you are better and better and better. It's a very poor approach to reality, where you really need to blame others to attain some type of worthiness for yourself. But actually blaming is, I don't want to go into those details too much, but blame generally is described, at least in certain circles. Interestingly, I was reading the other day, today, as a way to discharge pain and discomfort. That's in certain research circles, that's what blame is actually. That's the real background of blame. It's not just pointing to others, you are responsible for me. Actually, what is really going on there, someone is discharging pain and discomfort by pointing outside of themselves, but not taking full responsibility for themselves. And this verse, third verse, is really about taking responsibility for ourselves. And I know that's not easy, but that's what we need to transcend this victim consciousness. So in opposition to this idea of victim consciousness, we have the idea of divine consciousness, Krishna consciousness. And that will have to do with, again, attributes such as acceptance, commitment, and responsibility. Again, this verse is speaking about that, nishtha. Nishtha means fixed commitment with the ideal. Kirtaniya sadahari. It's not just, I'm chanting japa many rounds per day, a number. It has nothing to do with that. And you can chant 1 lakh and 3 lakhs per day, and you can be totally without deep commitment in your practice with the ideal. So this verse speaking about that, nishta, fixed commitment with the ideal. That's meant to be steady in bhakti. But that stability of nishta, interestingly, that's the point, it won't come just by you becoming a superhero and I'm now super steady and I'm chanting and doing this. And actually that stability will come from recognizing our vulnerability. The second verse, that's part of that. This verse, that's further implied. So real stability, real strength, real balance and empowerment will come from recognizing our fragility before the proper agency, again, and asking for help and committing to change, committing to practice, another word. So gradually attaining the fixation that this verse is expressing. So it's not that this verse is for those who are already nishta and they can read them and say, oh, I'm there. Mainly it's meant for those who would like to be there, are not yet there, but are on the way there, so they need to nurture their approach to that reality. So we need to present ourselves in the most vulnerable possible way to the most empowered possible prospect, which is Swarup Shakti, Bhakti Shakti. So such a particular combination will create, again, the steadiness and fixation described in this verse. So, and something I would like to mention, and now I'm turning a little bit to what I spoke last year in a similar class to this, is that this attribute of vulnerability is so attractive not only to us, for us as humans, as sadhakas, but even it's valuable and empowering for God himself. So that's an important point. So we are trying to dedicate ourselves in a spirit of divine vulnerability to the will of the Absolute. So when the Absolute himself engages in vulnerability, if you will, we ourselves will become much more empowered. So let's give some examples about the connection of vulnerability and empowerment in relation to Bhagavan before finishing my exposition. I think I have some few minutes more. So it says, for example, I don't know, some famous example we can give is Thakur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Apart from singing this beautiful Gurudev Kripa Bindu Diya, we sang before the class as a very nice hymn for this spirit of being vulnerable in the front of the most generous agency, Sri Guru. Also, Thakur Bhaktivinoda, once he made a very interesting particular statement, and he mentioned that he would like to leave his body at Kurukshetra, which is a very unusual project, because most of the Vaishnavas conceive of leaving their bodies ideally in one of the main dams of Gaudiya Vedanta, which is Vrindavan, Navadvip, Puri. But he mentioned Kurukshetra. Now, of course, there's a point there that we will explain. But interestingly, he said that, but he never, if you study his life, he never made any practical arrangement for doing that. So he basically wanted to make a point by saying that. Even though he did nothing in practical terms to make that reality, he wanted to make a point. And what's the point? As you know, in brief words, in Kurukshetra, apart from the Bhagavad Gita, the Brajavasis met Krishna after many years of separation. At one point, Sri Radha, the gopis, are meeting with him intimately. And Krishna is inviting them to join him at that precise moment, but Radha is feeling herself totally, if you will, like disconnected from the environment. Proper environment was not there for the full bloom of love. Vrindavan was not there, Peacock Feather was not there, Bamsi was not there, Elephant was there, Crown was there, armies were there. So she was just next to Krishna after so many years of separation, but she was not able to join him as she would like, and she was needed for. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying, in that moment, Sri Radha is in a moment of great necessity, of great vulnerability. So if we can serve her there, that will create the maximum remuneration for us. A little bit of service in the moment of biggest vulnerability will create the biggest empowerment. for the servants. And what's that empowerment? Of course, to receive much more energy to offer further and further seva. So we see, vulnerability has its charm. We are speaking about Radha, now we'll speak about Krishna, Mahaprabhu. They are the most attractive features of the divine, the sweetest ones, and the most vulnerable ones. So fragility has its enchantment, if you will. I remember Jordan Peterson also saying that once. He mentioned about Superman, this comic Superman, that in the beginning he was Superman. Nobody could kill him, nothing could harm him. He was just invincible, immortal. And so he was so superhuman that people started to get bored about reading him. And the reading of the comic went down like nothing. So eventually they started to make him much more fragile and vulnerable to kryptonite. I don't know how to say in English. No? So he could die because of that or because of that. So he became more vulnerable and thus he became more attractive. And people started reading that again. Like a baby. You see a little baby, and for all of us that's so charming, but at the same time it has to do with the fragile situation in which a baby is. He's so fragile, so vulnerable, and so attractive. So we see there is a connection between vulnerability and beauty. And of course, there's a connection between beauty and empowerment. Everyone in this world wants beauty. That's power, basically. That's translated as power. Krishna is the supremely attractive. We always hear that, the all-attractive one. And that's the all-powerful one. But and also the all-vulnerable one. As we know, he's totally open in a visceral way, embraced by the influence of Sarup Shakti. He's controlled by the love of his devotees, Yashoda, chasing him, to chastise him, their friends, taking him to the ground, struggling, Sri Radha chastising him with words, and he's crying, and he's imploring for mercy. Interestingly. That's the God we worship, a God who shows topmost vulnerability. And especially, he shows that the ultimate vulnerability in his form as Mahaprabhu. That's the highest reach of vulnerability and the highest reach of empowerment. So you know what gave rise to the Gaur avatar, Krishna witnessing the degree of love of the gopis and the degree of their vulnerability in separation from him, and the degree of their courage and the degree of their love, their empowerment. They were fully vulnerable and they were full empowered. And Krishna sees that. There's a point that he says, I don't know that level of vulnerability. I want to taste that. I want to taste Radha Bhava. So that gives rise to Gaur Krishna. And Gaur Krishna is the culmination, you say in English, like the conclusion of divine insatisfaction, if you will, in this context. Now that's personified in the most fragile aspect of the Absolute, which is at the same time the most volcanic one, Mahaprabhu Sri Chaitanya Dev. He's known as the golden volcano of divine love. Imagine such a name was given by Sridhar Maharaj. But so fragile was Mahaprabhu also. Krishna in his mood of Asrad and Digambira. So that's why Mahaprabhu is special for us. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he's very special, but he himself as Mahaprabhu, he shows a specially vulnerable face. And Krishna is Supreme Personality of Godhead, Mahaprabhu is Supreme Personality of Krishna. So this Gaur Lila is teaching us a very valuable lesson, in the context of today's topic. So that lesson is our most empowered prospect lies in the land of vulnerability, basically. That's our most empowered prospect, in that direction, in that land. And that's our open secret, as he said. That's the God we worship, the God of vulnerability and the God of empowerment, eventually. So, some words. And as a conclusion, let me share 2 minutes more and I'm finishing. Excuse me. So going back to our beginning topic, making full circle, hopefully, we are in this quarantine confinement period. Those dynamics make us more and more difficult to to be evasive in connection to our fragile nature. But that's not the problem. Again, some people are just praying for it to end because they feel that's the problem. But actually, properly approached, that's the solution to those things that we still are reading as problematic in our lives. So we should take advantage of the present situation now to get in touch with that deep vulnerability, recognize, embrace that in the spirit of Mahaprabhu's verse and be full empowered. Mahaprabhu himself was, again, in the Gambhira, in his maximum zenith of vulnerability, when he was nurtured the most by Swarup Damodar, by Ramananda, by Gadadhar Pandit at some distance. But at that moment that Krishna Mahaprabhu opened himself in such a vulnerable moment for 12 years in a row, and he was confined, he was in quarantine for 12 years in the Gambhira, in a room for 2 per 2, so a small place, but as we say, big ideal, big vulnerability. Of course, we are not to imitate Mahaprabhu, but by force we are in similar situation at some level. So the point is that we shouldn't imitate Mahaprabhu, but the precepts that Mahaprabhu is giving to us in this verse should be executed somehow or other. But again, somehow or other, I mean, in a healthy way, not in a neurotic way, in a sustainable way, not victimizing ourselves in our unique present day situation. So in this way, the vulnerability, the humility that we find in this verse itself has to do with real, I will say, real sobriety, real, sobriety. When you are of sane mind, if you will, to recognize basically who I am. That's humility, who I am, who I really am. No? And understand who I am now, that's inseparable from my potential. So there is some worthiness in who I am and in my potential, because I have the capacity of becoming something glorious under the proper shelter. But also, of course, I have the potential of becoming a disaster under durasraya, under a false sense of shelter. But even in those cases where I'm behaving in a wrong way, if you will, still my glorious potential will be there waiting for me. So we should be always smiling and glad because of that, and learning through our mistakes. And that's all part of our vulnerability. To recognize that, the kintsugi art in China, I think, that some piece of a jar is broken, and instead of throwing, they put gold in those lines that are broken, and as an idea of honoring the experience, what has the jar gone through, all these scars, no? That's a sign of experience in life. No? So real humility means to be who I am and to be who I can be, no? To recognize my potential. So that's the nature of bhakti. Again, bhakti is a gift that we cannot give to ourselves. Guru Maharaj once told me that very nicely. He told me, actually, the process in itself is such that we have no chance of becoming proud, because if we are practicing bhakti, it's not by our own volition, but by bhakti's own grace. So it's a gift that we cannot give to ourselves. So we shouldn't be proud of something that we cannot give to ourselves. So we cannot give bhakti to us. We cannot give shraddha to us. We cannot give nishtha to us. We cannot give this third verse to us by force. That's the point. All this is a grace that will be given. They will give unto us. They will empower us when they want, but especially when they want is when they see in us the proper attitude to receive an honored empowerment, which is vulnerability. So in this way, we can develop all the attributes in this verse by the grace of Bhakti Shakti only. So in such a way that she may empower us to exercise vulnerability in the context of bhakti, which is very different to express vulnerability outside the context of bhakti, of course. Different types of empowerment will be there. In this case, we are speaking about vulnerability and Swarup Shakti. And we already have some bhakti in us, not because it's inherent, but because we have been in touch with bhakti and the bhaktas. So if we have some bhakti, we should use that bhakti in order to upgrade our vulnerability. No? Our present vulnerability should be upgraded to its next level, to its next updated, latest version, if you will. And that will happen by the empowerment, which comes from the Kripa Shakti of Bhagavan in the form of his devotees, Srinam, and this divine third stanza, this third verse of Sikshastakam. So we should, just concluding with this word from Guru Maharaj, we should make an effort to get grace. Yes, but again, it's not only by effort that we will get grace. Grace, Krishna's grace won't come only because of our practice. Even if we perform a very intense sadhana, if there's no dainya, if there's no humility, Krishna won't be moved to appear. And again, as I say, that's the humility, real humility, which has to do with vulnerability. And this verse, that's what will force Bhagavan to bestow his grace, to make himself appear in our lives. These days we are studying the Gopi Gita, which is, like I will say, one of the most clear examples of all that we have been speaking here today. Because the Gopis are those devotees who are loving Krishna fully, in the fullest possible way, without guarantee of anything. They are taking all risks, leaving everything behind, social consideration, domestic duties, family attachments, taking full risk, not knowing if Krishna will accept them, if they will be able to, all risk, no guarantee of gain, loving Krishna fully. And as you know in the Bhagavatam, Krishna seems to not reciprocate to them. So imagine, and they start to sing this Gopi Gita, which are 19 songs of full vulnerability. They are opening their hearts, singing their hearts in such a way, with such courage, with such, with such courage, with such vulnerability, fragility, but sincerity, that creates a particular empowerment that Krishna will have to appear. And Krishna appears, it is said in the Bhagavatam, Sakshan Manmata Manmataha. In the most beautiful possible form, he will never appear in other leelas, because his topmost beauty in that moment will be proportionate to the level of vulnerability the gopis are expressing. So this vulnerability is the path, and empowerment is a goal. There's another way of saying dainya is the path, humility is the path, this verse is the path, and empowerment, prem, divine goal, will be the goal. So some words I wanted to share today with you about this idea of vulnerability and empowerment. So in the context of this third verse of Sri Sikshastakam, trying to share some, if you will, nuanced perspectives of this unending stream of meanings that are contained into this verse. So thank you so much for your attention, your time. And if you have any questions, tomorrow we will have Q&A session, not today. So you may have any questions regarding what we spoke now. You may write them, and tomorrow we will, now Archon City for sure will announce the timings and other things detailed for tomorrow. So again, thank you very much. Panchakalpatarubhyascha kripasinduvyeva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Gurudev ki jai, Sriman Mahaprabhu ki jai, Sri Harinam Sankirtan ki jai, Sri Sikshastakam ki jai, Gaur Radha Madhav ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Premanand Hari.
Padma Swami ki jai. We were muted. Very lovely class. Thank you so much. And just make a little bit of announcements for tomorrow. There's a mistake in the schedule that says that from 9:30 in the morning, Vaishnav Maharaj is going to be joining us from Vrindavan, India, and Padmanabha Swami will be translating his talk from Spanish into English. And then from 10:30, it says from 10:30 to 11, we're going to have a breakout group. Actually, that's our japa. We're going to have japa in the morning from 7:30 to 9:30, anyone that wants to do that. But this 10:30 to 11:15 is our Japa Sunday that we've been doing this now since the last Japa retreat. And I've really enjoyed it. I find it's really sweet. So we'll do that. We'll have some japa time together. And then Guru Maharaj Swami Tripurari will be speaking on Nishta from 11:30 to 12:30. Maybe he'll go a little extra. And then we'll be offline in the afternoon from 12:30 to 4 p.m. and then 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Padmanabha Swami will do questions till 5:30. 4 to 5:30, sorry. Really messed up on here. Will be questions and answers, and 5:30 to 6, the devotees will share what their takeaway from the retreat weekend is. So that's the schedule for tomorrow. Everybody get a really good night's sleep and be refreshed and ready to be the best version of yourself and come and join us.
Archana, so there's no Vaishnava Swami tomorrow?
Yes, he's at night at 9:30 to 10:30.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And thank you all so much for your participation, and it's been a lovely day. Hare Krishna. Any questions before we leave? Anybody questions about the schedule or anything? Okay, you'll all be back tomorrow? Yeah? Yes, okay. All right, Haribo.